Pupil Accounting Technical Support session. We're going to wait just a couple more minutes here to get going. Just some housekeeping. We are going to present and then break periodically to afford some time for questions. We will be using the chat function for questions today, so that if you have something, feel free to enter that into the chat, and then when we take that break, we'll try to get through those questions, or at least as many as possible. Any questions that we don't get through, and even those that we actually do cover during today's session, will become part of a frequently asked questions document that will be available for reference. I think after all of these sessions have completed, so next week sometime, that should become available. Okay, we're officially 2 after. I think we're hovering kind of at around 200 participants today. The session is going to be recorded. It will be made available for consumption if you wish after we finish the web series. In fact, I think that maybe even after we finish this session, it'll become available on the web sometime this week. I believe that that's how we handled the first session in any case. My name is Brian Slosky. I work for the Office of Financial Management. I'm a specialist with the office, primarily dealing with pupil accounting. And I'm joined here by Jessica Beagle. Jessica, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. My name is Jessica Beagle. I am a financial analyst with the Office of Financial Management, and I primarily do pupil accounting alongside Brian as well for about 10 months out of the year.
Thank you. We also have Kelly Flaminio. She's going to be moderating the session, or helping us maintain a little bit of flow here today, monitoring the chats. And again, if you weren't here at the very beginning, we're utilizing the chat function for questions, and we will be giving some breaks intermittently to allow for some of those questions to be answered. Today's topic is on the return to learn laws. We've issued a couple of memos to the field. The first was kind of a 50,000-foot overview of what return to learn does. We followed that memo up with one that provided details specific to the days and hours requirements, as well as attendance. We speak to two-way a bit, and then we briefly will address membership. So this information is most important, I think, to districts out there in understanding what days, hours, and attendance is going to look like during the 2021 school year. That Return to Learn bill package ended up becoming 3 different acts. We've listed them here. This PowerPoint will be available. The links will be clickable if you wish. But those 3 acts ended up being 147, 148, and 149. They were signed into law on August 20th, and we got our memo out to folks detailing how to comply on the 21st. That was in the last slide. The law does waive strict compliance with the 180-day, 1,098-hour requirements. We'll try to get into what that looks like a bit more in the upcoming slides. It's tricky, and strict compliance is an interesting terminology to use. The legislation, while they did get rid of the strict compliance, still indicates that there still must be the equivalent content of the 180 days and 1,098 hours. So there's a couple of ways that you can do that. They do provide, or this bill package provided districts with additional flexibility. In previous years, we've had available, of course, in-person learning, which is the most common type. And I think it still remains a fairly common type, at least at this point in the school year. We've got about 60% of districts who are providing or planning to provide some form of in-person instruction. The law has also provided districts with the ability to utilize a number of different formats other than in-person, such as virtual instruction and packet-based. And this is where things are different. So prior to this these laws getting passed, we didn't have a methodology to allow districts as a whole to use packet-based instruction for pupil accounting purposes. So these laws bridge that gap for districts during this upcoming, or this school year. So if we're not following 180 days and 1,098 hours strictly, what does it look like? We are going to get into that in a bit, but what we can offer is that it is more flexible, and that we don't expect that all districts are going to have a calendar that shows 180 days or demonstrates 1,090 hours. What you may end up with is, students having the same number of courses that they've had scheduled to be considered full-time in a previous year. And maybe that content has been offered previously, and that content required 180 days and 1,090 hours to be delivered. So kind of get that that thinking down as how we're approaching this school year. That said, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica to walk you through days.
Okay, so Brian talked about how this year looks slightly different when it comes to days and hours. And so what does that look like for a district to demonstrate how they're providing those 180 days of content? And to demonstrate this, the most straightforward method may be just to provide a school calendar showing 180 school days, just as districts have done in the past. Or districts may show teacher availability, and they can do this, they can be available to their students either by phone, email, text, or say like this Zoom platform here, and provide that availability to students. Alternatively, districts may demonstrate that they're providing the same instructional content as they have in the previous school years. And just like Brian had suggested, simply put, that means if a district schedule has always been 6 courses and those courses would have taken 180 days to teach last year, the district would continue to provide a 6-course schedule. So a few districts have ended up pushing their start date back a couple of weeks after the bill is passed to further kind of prepare for the year. And in doing so, they wanted to know how that would affect the requirement to provide 180 days of content. And first we'd want to know, is the course content the equivalent of that has been offered in a previous year? And then we might ask, are students still expected to carry the same number of courses previously required to be considered full-time? And if you can answer yes to both those questions, then this adjustment of the start date wouldn't have any impact for this year. If the reduced number of days would end up resulting in students receiving less content than in this school year than had been provided previously, then additional days would need to be scheduled. So what does it look like to demonstrate the 180 days of content are being provided? Well, to sort of reiterate that, some districts can demonstrate that by maintaining a 180-day calendar or of instruction, or they may demonstrate it by having a calendar of 180 days of instruction in a combination of instructional time and district provided professional development. Even if the district does not schedule 180 days specifically, we still recommend maintaining a calendar of the planned instructional days. If the district does not have 180 days scheduled, but the content for the courses has remained the same as in previous years, this would help support the same number of days of instructional content are being provided in fewer days. A certification statement can be used, but it should be used in conjunction with documentation of a calendar of course schedules and or course content or teacher availability. A certification statement on its own would not be sufficient. So moving on to hours, districts were given similar options to demonstrate the hours in the memo that went out earlier. As suggested with days, districts may show that teachers are available to students, again, either by phone or email or text or Zoom or other platform, and provide that availability to students. Districts could potentially examine the amount of course content and project those hours it would take to provide the content. Or the district can show that the combination of courses scheduled over 180 days should produce 1,098 hours of content, as of course they have in previous years. So this formula was provided in the Return to Learn Details memo. It's there to assist districts with calculating the number of hours educational services are made available to students. This formula is taking the number of days in the year that teachers are available for instruction and multiplying it by the number of hours the teachers are available each day. And this will help demonstrate instructional hours using the teacher availability. And here's a second formula that we provided that a district might use to demonstrate instructional hours using course content. You would take the number of minutes a lesson would take for each course and multiply it by the number of days of instruction for the year. Then, of course, you would divide by 60 to get the total number of hours. Similar to creating a calendar for the days, a district can demonstrate their instructional hours using the days and hours of instruction forms provided in previous years. These determine the instructional hours based on the minutes of scheduled instructional time daily based on a bell schedule. This works well if we're in a seated environment, but doesn't always translate to other modalities. Instead, districts may use their pacing guides to demonstrate time, or if a course has been offered previously and the content is the same, that can serve as documentation of the instructional time for the course. The question has been asked, what if a district wants to stagger start times or the end of the day release times to help with social distancing or parent pickup, just to minimize the number of students or people passing in the hallways? And staggered schedules are allowable if the content of the courses is not reduced. If a district needs additional flexibility with staggering schedules and meeting the content expectation, the district might consider utilizing virtual learning from home to account for any additional reductions in instructional content. So some of the frequently asked questions you might say that we've been receiving are about professional development. Can a district use professional development as instructional time? And last year, you might recall that you could count professional development as instructional time per section 10110. And this has not been removed from law. All of the requirements of that subsection would need to be met to count the time toward the instructional time requirements. So if you're using PD as instructional time, you'll want to make sure that you can check off all of the items in section 10110 to use that time. Can a district still use passing time? Yes, passing time is still allowable. And we've had a few folks ask if they can extend their passing time to provide additional time for cleaning, for hand washing, for reducing the number of students in hallways. And in order to extend your daily passing time beyond the 30 minutes that may be counted toward instructional time, all you need to do is reach out to your auditor and ask for approval to do so. And finally, can passing time be used in a synchronous environment? And the answer is yes. Since this environment emulates the in-person instruction, meaning that students have specific time scheduled for instruction and attendance is required, passing time is allowable. And the last question that has come up frequently is, are students expected to be online, on screen, logged in during the entire day? And from MDE's standpoint, we at the department level have no expectation that students must be on screen or logged into their courses for 6 hours a day. In a virtual environment, students are allowed to complete their assignments at their own pace.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh, my. Hi, buddy.
if you have your microphone muted, please mute it.
Hi, Chunkaboy. You're just so mellow. Oh, my gosh, he's gorgeous.
So we expect that they're allowed to complete their assignments at their own pace.
And he's a chocolate lab, right? Okay. Thanks for showing them to me.
Here we go. All right. So with that, we're going to turn it back over to Brian to talk about attendance.
Thank you, Jessica. So this is actually a great point for us to take a short break. I see that there are some questions in the chat. Jessica and I will try to get those answered for you. Jenny wants to know if a virtual teacher is holding regularly scheduled virtual tutoring sessions to reteach lessons for small groups of students, could that contact with the students during the tutoring sessions, reteaching a lesson, be used as a two-way interaction, similar to what is being allowed when a student attends a live instruction remotely? So if I understand you correctly, Ginny, students are being given an opportunity to join a teacher in through a synchronous platform like what we're using today. And during that session, the students can ask the teacher questions about content that has been covered, and they can have other interactions with the teacher, as well as being provided some opportunities for reteaching. And we would consider that to be an in-person interaction. So you would document that as that in-person interaction toward the two-way. So in short, yes, you could use these opportunities where you'd have a teacher, one of the students' teachers, reteaching something to help satisfy the two-way interaction requirements. So there's a question from Pam. Do students who are marked as pandemic learners not need to be also be reported as virtual students? In other words, would they not be POP 3? So Pam, this is an interesting question because if I think it's based on you know, what the student initially starts the year out as. So if underneath the in-person instruction, we find that the students are really learning through a virtual platform, yeah, we would consider those kids to be virtual learners. But not every student who is a pandemic learner is going to be a virtual student. And we haven't yet decided, to be quite honest, if because of this, you know, new environment that we're in, if these basically become students who are all part of the POP 3. I don't see that we're going that direction, but we will definitely get some clarification out to the auditing group on how to handle that. What methods or areas do not allow the 1030-day rule? So thanks, Kim. This is a good question, and it has come up a few times, and there does seem to be some confusion. The 1030-day rule doesn't apply to two-way specifically, okay? Which means that the 1030-day rule isn't going to help you meet the two-way interactions that are required for students every week. They don't help you satisfy the attendance requirement. And they don't help you if you're using two-way interactions specifically for membership. So that 1030-day rule comes into play specifically for students who are going to satisfy the membership requirement by completing something for each scheduled course on count day. So just as we have students who are scheduled to be in person on count day, but maybe, you know, absent for one reason or another, they're given, you know, a certain number of days to reappear and attend those missing classes to be able to be counted for a full FTE. That same concept applies when you're using a count day measure in each course on the student's schedule to satisfy the membership requirement. Can you give the, so I think, can you give the website where the recorded sessions will be available? Jessica, I think, did provide a link to that website. So you have that in the chat for you now. If a student is absent from virtual classes but completes an assignment for that class, and the teacher gives feedback to the student, does that constitute participation and meet the attendance and two-way requirement? So Donna, there's a lot of, you know, confusion, and I think maybe some overlap. You know, when absences count and when they don't, and going back to what I just said earlier, absences are only going to affect those students who are trying to satisfy the membership requirement by doing something in each class on the student schedule on count day. Then we get into, you know, if a student is absent, what happens next? And the 1030-day rule kicks in. If a student initiates the two-way interaction and the teacher responds about the course content and the program, then the student responds back, will that satisfy the two-way contact definition? Yes. So good question, Hillary. Would a virtual student have attendance for MSDS? You know, we're still working with our partner CEPI to work out the details on that, and I know that we're going to have further communication. So I'm going to ask that we just hang on to that one for the time being, knowing that we'll have some updated guidance for you well before you have to complete that reporting. Pandemic learning is defined as receiving instruction in a mode instituted as a result of the pandemic. Yeah, that is how we're defining it, or that is how it's defined, Todd. What penalty, if any, is there for districts where teachers do not complete the two-way interactions with students? So Leanne, we're going to get into the two-way in much more detail, but I know that this question refers to the requirement under 98A, Section 98A of the State School Aid Act. And there is no specific penalty, monetary penalty for not completing those. But what is going to happen is that districts are required to, number one, announce publicly their participation rates for each week during a month during their reconfirmation meeting. And number two, they're required to post those rates on their website for transparency. So while there is no state aid penalty necessarily tied to those two ways, there's substantial accountability just because of the amount of transparency that's required. Todd is asking, pandemic learning is defined as receiving instruction in a mode implemented in response to a pandemic. If full virtual school is delivering content exactly as it did last year, do the pandemic rules apply to it? So 98A applies to every student in your district. Everyone is learning, is a pandemic learner at this time. So what I can tell you is that if you are following the rules that you have in prior years, you are at least partially meeting the requirements for pandemic learning. What you may be short on is the two-way interactions per month. Does a shared time student, non-public student, still have to have the two-ways a week and the one two-way in a month for attendance purposes? And Ingrid, yes, our shared time students are public school students. I mean, they're just part-time public school students, and there isn't anything in the bill package or the law now that exempted those students from the requirements. So we're expected to be completing those two ways. And Kobe is asking, can a 180-day calendar include PD days counted as instructional time? I think we heard Jessica say that yes, you can use PD days. However, in order to do so, you have to meet the requirements of Section 101, subsection 10 of the State Aid School Act. Barbette, with two-way communications affecting K-12 at LEAs, is it the same for cyber schools? So Barbette, I'm going to have to take that one offline. Certain sections, or maybe Jessica knows the answer to this. I know that cyber schools are exempted from certain sections in the new laws and not others. I believe that 98A still applied to them. I'm just not able to answer with 100% confidence. So Barbette, I'll get you that information. Unless Jessica has.
Well, yeah, let's look at it later because I was thinking that cybers were exempted from 98A.
Yeah.
75% still, well, maybe not. We need to look at it again. Yeah.
Thank you for that question. Can forgiven time be applied to this year's days and hours documentation? The forgiven time wasn't struck from legislation, so I think it still applies. It's kind of an awkward thing to think about, to be honest, if we're all learning virtual, how that still applies. But I can see that there are instances where district may be having trouble with giving students or allowing students to access content because their platform is down. And maybe in that situation, you would want to use forgiven time. Okay. What does it mean for a teacher to be available for instruction to students if a teacher is on his or her planning time, at which time they are available to meet with students, email students, etc.? Is he or she available? Rick, I think I'll let Jessica take that one to speak to what it looks like to make teachers available to your students.
Sure. So I kind of look at it like your teacher may be teaching for their 6 or 7 hours a day, or however many hours they're traditionally scheduled. They may be teaching it during certain times. They may be having their planning period at certain times. But during those hours, they're available. They're available to some students during some point of the day and other students during another point of the day. So you could take that schedule of theirs and that could be turned into what we would consider their availability. So at some point they're able to get to emails, at some point they can make a phone call or take a phone call, at some point they can get online and have a Zoom conversation with a student or a group of students. So I think that's how we would look at availability in the easiest way.
Thank you. Rebecca is asking, in a synchronous platform, does a student have to turn on the camera to satisfy the two-way interaction, or is verbal confirmation sufficient? So we allow telephone conversations to be used for two-way, and we would allow a student in a synchronous platform to communicate without necessarily turning on the microphone. I think the best way to document a student having been, part of that live lesson is actually to download a log of all the participants and maintain that as your proof that the student was there. And then you having a verbal conversation is what is actually meeting that requirement. Okay, Tammy is clarifying. There was a question earlier where students were being pulled in for tutoring or coaching. And the clarifying point is I think that they want to know, can anyone be a tutor that can pull students in with small groups, or do they have to be a certified teacher or sub? So the law is requiring that these two ways happen between teachers. The students' teachers, meaning the students, the teachers that show up on that student's schedule of classes. If that teacher is absent and a substitute has stepped in, that substitute would be able to fulfill those two ways. And I think what we've heard some districts doing is setting up a homeroom where they can accomplish these two ways a few times throughout the day for students. That seems to make a lot of sense. Then you're making it one specific person's responsibility to monitor, and that homeroom teacher, who is also going to appear on that student's schedule, would be that person for our accountability purposes here. So good follow-up. Carol, we're going to get to the count day or membership requirements in just a minute here.
It might be a good time to
yeah.
a lot of questions about two-way, so it might be a good time to get into that.
Yes, I agree. So I am going to hold on the rest of these. Hopefully Jessica can remember where we left off. So on the next slide here, let me see if I can slide some things out of my way. The next slide, we're addressing what the attendance requirement is. In a traditional year, the attendance requirement is measured over 180 days. The district as a whole, for each day, must hit that 75% of students being present in order to avoid a deduction. Under the pandemic learning laws, we are measuring things differently. Students don't need to be physically present. Our attendance is based on two-way interactions. Most specifically, teachers need to have a single two-way interaction with a student each month. And you have to have that interaction with at least 75% of your students during that 30-day span, that month, to avoid penalty. We've received numerous questions about who this applies to, because students are coming and going throughout the month. We expect that they still will be in this environment. And our answer is that the denominator it represents all of the students who have been enrolled in the district at some point during that month. So you will want to make sure that during that 30-day period, you have at least one contact. Now, the relief is that the two ways that we're required to provide through 98A, which is two ways each week, should help districts, get to at least 90, or I would say 90% of their students, hopefully. What is a two-way interaction? Perhaps we should have let into this for people who didn't already know, but a two-way interaction is really just a conversation between the student and teacher. It is initiated by the teacher according to certain sections of the new law. The two-way can be a student being physically present for instruction. It could be an email dialogue. It could be an instant message. It could be a telephone conversation, or as we've kind of pointed out several times, it could be attendance in a platform like what we're using today, where synchronous communication is happening. So Zoom, Skype, Google Meet are examples. But once again, if you're doing that, if you're using one of these live platforms, I highly recommend that you print your attendee list and keep that as your proof that the students were there. So we've been getting questions about what this would look like to log, and we provided a sample two-way interaction log in the exhibit section of the Pupil accounting manual. And this is a pretty straightforward sample of what that could look like. So we would suggest that you get in contact with your ISD auditor to find out what their recommended form would be. They may not have a preference, but they might have something that they've found helpful and want you to use. So that would be the first thing I would do. But if they don't have anything that they're suggesting, there's a sample of what we would be looking for if you were to keep a log like this. All right. So getting a little bit further into things. Of course, there are three new laws, or amended in some cases, and with it, each provides language referring to two-way interactions. So the first is our extended COVID-19 learning plan, which is now the new Section 98A, where two-way interactions are required each week. And once again, this specific two-way isn't being audited. It isn't going to have a financial penalty if you don't get to it, but this is the two-way that districts have to report on their transparency page. as well as publicly announce during their reconfirmation meetings. Then section 101 is where we find our attendance requirement. And to meet the 75% attendance requirement, you have to have at least one two-way interaction with your students in a month. And then finally, in this, we'll get into the differences, the different ways to meet the membership requirement in a couple more slides. But membership, section 6, is where we find the last place where two-way is referenced. And if you're using two-way to meet the membership requirement, and I would highly recommend that you do, since you have to be doing two ways for the first two purposes that we've gone through anyway, you're going to want to use or have at least one two-way interaction with all of your kids during each week of the count period. That is specifically defined as Wednesday to Tuesday, starting with count day. There was a fourth way. We're steering districts away from using 50D for this year, and here is why. If you use 50D, you potentially are going to be using mentors for your two-way interactions. However, you cannot use a mentor-student two-way interaction to meet the requirements of 98A or Section 101. So what you would inadvertently be doing if you are using mentors in 50D is introducing a third two-way interaction that you would have to have each week during the count period to make sure that you cover all the requirements. So we are not recommending that you go this way. Okay, so some of our frequent questions. Can we use an attendance record as documentation of two-way interaction for in-person and synchronous learners? So yes, you can use an attendance record to document that two-way has taken place for students that are going to be physically present, as well as students who are learning through a platform like Zoom, where our instruction emulates that in-person, face-to-face environment. The attendance record cannot be used for any other type of learner. So if you have students who are learning virtually or asynchronously, this isn't going to apply. If you have students who are learning through packets, this is not going to apply to you either. We are recommending that you consider, especially if you have multiple modalities that you're teaching students through, how you are going to capture all of the students in a single stream. So the attendance records may ultimately need to be somehow transposed into a two-way log to indicate that these students are having two ways, and to keep all that information in one place. I think if you're only utilizing a single modality, then that won't be a problem. Do we need to have two-way interactions for our shared time students? There was a question in the chat about this, and yes, simply the answer is yes. Do we need to have two-way interactions for our early middle college students? The answer to that is yes. For our 13th year our 13th year early middle college students, this poses a problem. In some cases, those students have an entire course schedule that is made up of post-secondary courses, and we are not expecting those college professors to provide two-way interactions. you are going to want to assign that student a teacher from the school who will then have those two ways. And again, it only needs to be, regarding one of the courses on the student's schedule. And in order to meet 98A, then you're going to want to have, two of those a week. We're not saying that you need to have a two-way with each of the teachers. Okay, with that said, I'm going to, maybe I'll take a quick break before we get into membership and see if we can address some more questions. Okay, actually, in the memo toward the top of page 3, it states that two-way interactions are required during each week. However, it mentions throughout the rest that at least one two-way interaction is required. So, and maybe this was made a little bit clearer when we put up the slide about the 3 different types of two-way. Each of those different types, are fulfilling different, requirements of law. And the bottom line is that you need two-way interactions a week to satisfy 98A. And those can be used, to satisfy your attendance requirement, which is once per month as well. And those can be used to satisfy during our count period the membership requirement, which is 1 two-way per week for each week of count. Carol, you're asking if a student attends class on count day and attendance is taken, must they also turn in an assignment? So this is physical attendance, I believe. And no, that physical attendance is going to satisfy that that requirement. So you would simply have the student record attendance for that student or those students in each class. And Ashley, you're asking how to code students, for the end of the year. We're going to need to get some additional clarification, I think, from our partner CEPI in this, but since you're speaking to our TSDL reporting, I think we're probably going to look at, what is the student really? What are they initially? And did they transition into a virtual environment as, as part of a need to provide education to a pandemic learner? So we'll get some additional information out, actually, to help with what the TSDL reporting requirements are going to be. We're fortunate that we've got a little bit of time to do that yet.
Brian, this is Kelly. Looking at the chat, there's a lot of questions about the two-way communication and what that can look like. So there's a lot of asking if it can be a Google form, can it be a Zoom call, and also who has to record it? So does it have to be the teacher of record? Can it be a mentor? Can it be a parapro? There's a lot related to that particular topic.
Okay, yep, thank you. Your two-way interactions have to occur between a teacher and the student. It is a conversation in most cases. So a Google form to me is more of an assignment. And I would not consider that to be two-way. A bulk email that goes out to students isn't initially a two-way until the student responds and then the teacher responds back. If that helps to clarify. Parapros are not going to be able to perform the two ways. Mentors are, as the laws, currently stand, are not part of the two-way process. So hopefully that helps.
Also wondering about what if the student doesn't respond?
Well, you know, if this, so here's what I've told districts in the past, and I think it still holds up. There's two different routes to meeting the membership requirement, and we're going to get into the other routes in just a moment. But I would go into it, you know, with a specific you know, idea of how you're going to meet the membership requirement first. Uh, do you want to use two-way to meet the membership requirement? And if so, then you need to have a two-way each week to retain your full membership for those students. If you only get 3 of the 4 weeks, there's going to be a proration of the membership for that student. Now, in the past, districts have had the option, and they still do, to do something on count day in each of their scheduled courses for membership instead of relying on two-way. And we have often said to districts, yeah, try that first. You know, get your students in the mindset that they're going to complete an assignment on Wednesday, and not just count day, have them do it on every Wednesday so that they're in practice for every class. And hopefully that gets, you know, 80–90% of your students. For the 10% or so that that don't complete an assignment, we can either try to follow up and have them complete an assignment in each course, or for the missing courses, you know, during the 10 or the 30 days. We'll cover how that works in a minute here. Or you could fall over immediately and start using two-way interactions to try to meet the membership requirements. So there's a bit of flexibility, but I would probably you know, pick a path and stick to it. And maybe the smartest thing is to try to get students used to completing an assignment in each course on count day, and then using two-way, at least for membership purposes, as your backup plan. Okay. So Justin is asking if the requirements under 50D are still accurate. You know, the pandemic learning laws now introduce flexibility. So you're not required to have parental consent. You're not required to have EDPs for your K-6 students, at least. The requirement to have them for our 7th graders and up still is provided through the revised school code. You're not required to, you know, post a you know, catalog of your virtual courses. So while some of those requirements under 50D, I mean, they are all accurate still, but I think there's more flexibility as a pandemic learner. And given that you still have to do the two-way interactions weekly under 98A, we're steering districts away from following 50D for this year. Cindy, you're wanting to have a little bit more information on the 10-30 days. We're going to get to that in just a minute. But what I can tell you is that 10-30 days don't apply to the two-way interactions. And Paul, you want to know if we can put an answer out there regarding the cyber schools? We certainly can. Carlo, you're asking if the two-way interactions per month in a virtual environment can be done by a mentor as opposed to a teacher. the new laws specifically call out the teacher, and they don't introduce the flexibility to use a mentor. Are all of the schools of choice rules in effect for both face-to-face and virtual students for this year? Yeah, you know, those sections of law, Cindy, haven't been removed. So if districts wanted to enroll through schools of choice, they can do so, and as done in the past, schools of choice can be opened up to a specific grade or to a specific building, or done district-wide, or it can be opened up for just a program. Can we set up a Google form for teachers of record to use for two-way logs? Or does it have to be something special? So what I would recommend is to have a conversation with your auditor. A log might make sense to you, but I want to make sure that your auditor is aware that that's what you want to use, and they'll certainly know if it's going to you know, meet the requirements, or if there's something that is going to you know, allow you to log this information not only more easily but more accurately. Do we need two-way interactions once per month for our seated students? Carrie, there's no differentiation. So the answer is yes. However, we're allowing, you know, those in-person students as well as those students who are attending through a synchronous platform such as Zoom to just simply use their attendance records for the two-way. So take attendance, have your teacher sign it, and that's proof of your two-way. And Lori wants to know if a Title I teacher interacts with a student, if that counts. So Lori, that teacher would have to be a teacher on the student's schedule. So you would have to tie that teacher to one of the student's courses. Okay, Gail, if you're using a synchronous platform, we're taking attendance just as you would in person. These are opportunities for teachers to have conversations with students to ensure that they're doing okay, that they have access to all the materials that they need, that they're on track. So we would want to see, you know, we would want to ensure that these have some context to the course content or progress, but the documentation isn't necessarily going to show that. Okay, I think we're going to take a break with that and return to our slides so that we can hopefully get through them all. With that said, I'll turn it over to Jessica.
All right. So this year's funding is being referred to as a super blend. And what that means in the short and condensed version is that the blend is 75% of last year's membership and 25% of this year's membership. We've had a couple of districts asking, does that 3-year average still apply? And we have about 70 or so districts that benefit from this. And so if those districts still benefit from this 3-year average, then yes, that 3-year average will apply still. And our first and second year PSAs will still have a 50-50 blend as they have in the past. So nothing has changed there for those. whoops, I think we might have went too far. Oh, we combined slides. There we go. So there's been a lot of discussion about two ways, but I think Brian was going to kind of cover them again as far as membership goes.
Thank you, Jessica. So when we're speaking to membership, as we kind of alluded earlier, there's two different routes that you can take, and one is going to be to use two-way interactions. Those two-way interactions would be once per week for the 4-week count period. That means one of the student's teachers needs to have an interaction regarding one of the courses on the student's schedule. And it could be a different teacher and a different course each week. The other route, and we're going to get into detail on the next slide, is count day activity. So if you're going to go this route, the students need to be prepared to have an activity in each of their scheduled courses. The legislation breaks out with slight differences these two different types of count day activities by the learner type, if we want to call it that, between non-sequential and sequential. When we talk about a non-sequential student, that is going to be the format that we traditionally see. The student has 6 courses on his or her schedule, and each day the student is expected to work on or be working on each of those courses. A sequential learner is going to have six courses still, but they're not necessarily expected to be working on them all at the same time. So the student is going to attempt maybe 1 or 2 courses, then they're going to complete those, then they're going to move on to the next course. So that's the difference between the two. So for our traditionally scheduled, non-sequential, non-consecutive, however you phrased it, learners, there are 4 different ways that a student can have an activity in each course. They can use a live lesson. They could log on to the course. This is different than what we would accept in a traditional year. They could have a conversation, either that's by telephone or through a platform like Zoom or Skype, or they can have an email dialogue. In each of these, the student is going to have a record for each of the scheduled courses. For our sequential learners, again, this is a student who's only maybe completing one of these activities for 1 course or 2 courses at a time. They can attend a live lesson. They could complete an assignment. They could complete a lesson or an activity, or the district can document that the student logged into a lesson, but the lesson is lengthy enough that it's going to span over several days and isn't complete, but there was progress made. For our count day membership learners, so the 10-30-day rule applies. So if a student logs into, let's say, 3 of their courses on count day, but not the other 3, we then have to determine, was the student excused or unexcused from those last 3 classes. And if they're unexcused, the student has 10 school days to complete an assignment or an activity rather in each of the scheduled courses. If the student happens to have been excused, they then have 30 days, the full count period that is, to make sure that they have an activity completed in each of their courses. All right, let me see if I can scan through a few questions. Barbette, our 2A communication sample didn't have dates. I thought that the top of it had a space where you could write in a date. If it didn't, we would want to add that. But yeah, you're going to want to be able to indicate in the log, you know, which week or which day this applies to even. And Rebecca wants to know if you can use assist to take attendance. Yeah, your student information system can be used to take attendance if the students are physically present or learning through a synchronous platform. And Gail wants to know if you're burdened with showing that our teachers initiated the 2A 2 times a week. So I think what you're going to want to be able to show is what we displayed in that log, Gail, that you had you know, something that the teacher requested of the student and then a response to that. Our auditors are looking for those 2 data points, right? Cheryl wants to know if we can complete or if we could create a participation code in PowerSchool. I don't know if PowerSchool would allow you to do that, but it seems to make sense that it would allow you to get you know, all that information then in one place. You still want to have the documentation to back up those 2 ways, but at some point you have to collate them, right? So I think it would be smart if you could get it all into one system. So Barbette is asking if for the 75% attendance 2A requirement, since it's only once per month, if they can just measure it on a single day. So Barbette, the way that works is we're looking over a 30-day period. Did you have a contact, a 2-way interaction with 75% of your kids or more? So I wouldn't suggest that they go the route of looking at a single day. I do think that an indicator of them being on or having met that, or at least substantially met that requirement, would be how they're doing and getting those two ways each week for 98A. So if they had a week where 90% of their students had 2-way interactions, you more than likely hit your requirement for attendance as well. Mary wants to know, can the week for 98A be from Wednesday to Tuesday to align? That is what we're suggesting, Mary. It's not specific in law, but it makes the most sense since we have to use that standard week for membership purposes. And I would hate to have districts confuse what is meant. And Judy, like I was saying to Mary, you want to know if those two ways can use a different week. I would suggest continuing to stick with with Wednesday through Tuesday, so that there's no confusion when it comes to meeting the membership requirement. So if we're using Zoom as our learning platform and students are meeting 2 to 3 times per week with Zoom, then our attendance record will be proper documentation. Yes, if you're having, synchronous instruction with students and their teacher, then that is, you can take attendance and have that satisfy your two-way requirement. Do download the participation log or participant log from Zoom so that you have that as documentation. What would we need or what would be needed for two-way for those students using packets? So there's a number of different ways, Lisa, and I think we're suggesting that you contact your auditor. Okay, with that, I think we'll move to briefly talking about 98A.
Sure. So we've covered a lot of the things that are talked about in 98A. Under Section 98A, the extended COVID learning plan is required. Some of the things that are on this slide, it's not all inclusive. So this does not include all of the things that are in 98A. So everyone will want to review that section to see all of the requirements. I'm sure someone at your district has already, but these are the pertinent section or pertinent pieces for our discussion today. So 98A requires that each district have their learning plan, and this plan must be reconfirmed or renewed every month, every 30 days. One component of the plan requires districts to identify how they will deliver instruction. And if that instruction is being delivered virtually, 98A requires that there's an assurance and a description of how pupils will be provided with equitable access to the technology and internet necessary to participate in the virtual instruction. This section also requires the frequent two-way interactions with all students. Districts are required to ensure that the two-way interactions occur between the pupil and the pupil's teacher during each week of the school year for at least 75% of the pupils enrolled in the district. And the two-way interactions under this section, as we've mentioned already, are not audited, but may be used to meet the other requirements, the attendance requirement and the membership requirement. Districts must publicly announce their weekly interaction rates monthly and publish those on their transparency reporting page. So if you have questions after this presentation, know that we are going to take all of the questions submitted in the chat, and we're going to create an FAQ document so that everyone's questions are answered. But we've also created a form here that you can use to submit questions. A lot of you know who we are. You have our email addresses, but sometimes our email gets up into the hundreds, and it's hard for us to pick out which ones still need to be answered and who's answered what. So with this form, we can not only keep track of whether or not your question's been answered, but also we can start tracking the frequently asked questions so that we can better address those for you. We've also compiled a list of resources. There are the House and Senate analysis, and then we've given you the links to each of the bills here and let you know which section they apply to and which sections they amend, or in the case of 98A that has been added. So this might be helpful. I like these documents. I refer to them myself all the time. They show you which pieces have been added, which pieces have been taken out. It's a good, if you're a visual kind of person like I am, I find them very helpful. And then following today, there will be several other webinars coming up. This webinar, a recording of it, and the PowerPoint slides will be posted. The PowerPoint slides are already posted out there if you would like to go out there and review them. They're posted on the COVID-19 education information and resources page. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom, I think it's the last icon there that they've grouped everything on one page, and I believe the link's been posted a couple of times in here in the chat for everyone. So there will be additional webinars. We'll be doing another pupil accounting webinar on the 16th. And then there's additional webinars if you're interested in Read by Grade 3 and benchmark assessments. So with that, we are at our time, I believe. But want to make sure that you all know that we are going to continue to answer your questions. I don't know if we still have time for additional questions, but we will put these in a FAQ document and get those posted for everyone so that you can review them and have your questions answered.
Thank you, Jessica. I think we do have a couple more minutes to try to get some of the questions that remain answered. This question is from A. Wood. I understand that if a student attends a live lesson, that counts for attendance and two-way, correct? Yes, that is correct. But what if a student does not attend a live lesson, but communicates with a teacher via phone or email? Should they then be marked present for attendance as well as or just documented as two-way through the SIS? So if a student is only communicating with phone or email or text, you're going to have a log. You're going to have the documentation of that conversation. If you want to also put that into your SIS, you can do that. That might make it easier for you to understand where you're at with meeting the 75% requirements. So Holly wants to know the two-way interactions are required for fifth year early middle student membership and not just attendance and 98A. So yes, so every student, even those fifth year or grade 13 early middle college students need to have at least one class on their schedule that is earning high school credit to be eligible for state aid purposes. And you would assign a district teacher to that class for the purposes of having the two-way. There's no way to exempt a student completely from the requirement, but thankfully it is just a single class that we can focus on for that purpose. Barbara wants to know if a counselor can be the person that does the two-way interaction for the 13th year early middle college students. So Barbara, if that teacher is assigned as the teacher of record, that would be possible. Can a facilitator who is grade level endorsed do the two-way interactions for asynchronous online learners rather than the teacher of record? So, Kobe, I think that we would see that that facilitator be the teacher of record, and so that would then enable that person to do the two-way. I'm not sure who else would be assigned as the teacher of record if not that person. Carrie, you want to know if a district were to set up homerooms to complete the two-way interactions, could they discuss any subject on the pupil's course schedule, or should it be the subject that the teacher is certified in? You know, I think that if it's a homeroom teacher, that teacher is there to speak to students in a traditional environment about all the courses that they're enrolled in. So I would allow it to be about any of the courses on the student's schedule. And Todd, you want to know if the teacher of record needs to be subject area certified, or is it only required that the teacher be grade level? So to break it down as simple as possible, you think about this for a minute. If your teacher of record is the actual teacher who is providing instruction to the student, then that teacher must be not only grade level appropriate, but subject area appropriate. If there is another teacher involved and your teacher of record is facilitating the instruction, meaning that this other teacher who is involved, the co-teacher, is also Michigan certified, but is not only grade level, but is also subject, then the combination of the two will satisfy the certification requirements. So any way you dice it up, at the end of the day, we need both grade level and subject area, but there is flexibility when a teacher is not actually providing instruction, but rather is facilitating it. That would allow for a combination of two teachers to meet the requirement. Candy, you asked if a teacher contacts a student multiple times and is documented but gets no response. This cannot be counted. That's correct, unfortunately. That's not two-way interaction. Robin wants to know if the facilitator is part of the two-way process. If you think that it's going to help, the facilitator could be, you know, in that mix. If we're speaking to the facilitator still being, you know, a teacher of record actually on the student, the teacher that's going to show up on the student's schedule. Lori, the definition of a mentor, and like I said, we're trying to steer away from this because it's not the best thing to use this year. But the definition of a mentor is a professional employee of the district. But the mentor cannot be used to satisfy the two-way requirements under 98A or Section 101. So we're steering people away from 50D for this year. Melissa is asking if that two-way interaction can happen between ancillary staff or a social worker or a teacher consultant. No, unfortunately, that two-way is spoken to being between the teacher and the student, meaning a teacher that is going to appear on the student's schedule of courses. So Carrie, you're asking, you know, if a building utilized 50D last year and maybe they had a waiver because they were an alt-ed program or an innovative program, and they did this same thing. I mean, everything is the same as it was last year. Is it just business as usual? And what I'll say is not really, because last year we didn't need to have two ways between the students and their teachers each week. So it is last year and then some. So I would steer them to you know, those requirements that we've outlined in the memo. Jennifer, you're asking about the Google form. You know, a form is a survey. Maybe we can have a an offline conversation. I'm not sure how it is two-way, but maybe it is, and maybe I just need to see how it is you're using your Google form. Alternatively, you could have a conversation with your auditor, and if your auditor approves it, then you wouldn't need to have a conversation with me. So Kim, you're asking for elementary, what does completing an assignment in each course mean? Can it basically be one assignment for third grade? And these are not virtual learners. So yeah, you know, when we move from our in-person to a pandemic learning environment for our young learners, where their course schedule wasn't broken out into 6 separate courses, I think it does confuse things. And but I think that we've reached a consensus that there would be an AM measure and a PM measure. So maybe they complete something in the morning, and then they complete something in the afternoon. Or maybe it makes more sense overall to just use two-way interactions for these students. I know that we've really reached our limit here. I see that there are still many unanswered questions. Again, we'll be going through those and do our best to compile a list of FAQs with answers. So thank you all for attending today's session. There is one more session coming up next week if you're interested in hearing us go over this content once more. Have a great day, folks.